All right, we're back here on Is It Prophecy on Israel National Radio, Root Sheva, and the show is syndicated as the Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Louis. We're continuing the conversation with Rabbi David Katz, who has his new book, The World of the Ger. You can pick that up on gergear.com. You can also go to solmazal.com. Rabbi Katz, let's talk about the question that's in the room, the elephant in the room. Where did it all go wrong with this concept?
In terms of 2,000 years ago?
Yes.
The exact details, this is what obviously needs worked out, and to make it from strong theory, applied theory, to facts. I would assume that when the redemption comes and all the Gerim return, we'll know exactly, and when everyone puts their minds together. But what it looks like is, and look, the story spans all of Jewish history. Right, the Ger has been the issue from Adam. I mean, really, then you get to Noah, the originator of the 7 laws of Noah. Shem, Abraham was the first Ger. How do you deal with that? Egypt making Gerim and slavery. It's been the underlying premise the whole time. Now, we only care about 2,000 years ago because we're still in that time period. Right, there's 2,000 years of chaos, which ended right at Abraham, from Adam, 2,000 years of Torah, which went from Abraham to the destruction of the temple, and then 2,000 years of Messiah.
Right.
And we obviously have not had the Messiah yet, and other people say we have. And that's why we really cared about 2,000 years ago. Or at least the Jews are saying we don't care, and they're saying we do care, and really it should be flipped. We should start caring, and they should stop caring. What it comes down to is when the Jews came in the land the second time with Ezra, and there was a whole issue of people being married to illegitimate wives, Jewish, non-Jewish, lustful, all these things. It appears that Ezra put the mitzvahs on everybody. As per the law the Vilna Gaon brings down, a ger in the land keeps all 613.
Wow, okay.
Now, we bring that in the book. Now, what does that mean? Right? Because they're not Jews. They don't go to a mikveh. The whole question has been by the rabbis, is there a fourth house of Israel? Right? Cohen, Levi, Israel, 3. What do we do with the fourth house, the ger? Are they Jews? Do we convert them? Are they on the outside? How do we graft them to us? Right? The famous four-headed shin, which represents the ger we don on our tefillin every morning and don't even realize what that means. So Ezra's trying to figure it out, and it's a second temple consciousness. There's no prophecy, really. No Shekhinah. No divine anything. You have the Hanukkah miracle, which is ger totally gone, viral at that time. Gerim are all over the land of Israel, to which the New Testament says in the Second Temple time period, there were people called God-fearers. God-fearers. Well, who do you think those were? Those were the Gerim. So they were always with us, different titles and terms. Nowadays it's called the Noahide. It used to be in the Rambam's time, the Chassidiya Olam. All right, there's all the time it changes the term. But it's always ger fundamentally by the Bible, by the Torah. And after Hanukkah, you're going to get, a real bad time. The temple's going to be rebuilt by Herod, not Jewish. The temple's going to be on its way down. You're going to get a guy named Jesus. Whether he even existed, I don't know. Maybe it's a mashal, an analogy, just the time period itself. I don't know. But let's just, for argument's sake, let's just say there was a Jewish guy named Jesus. Right? Again, I don't want Yeshua. I'm not interested, okay? Let's just assume that based on the vernacular of today, he was there. What he would have been doing was removing the yoke of Taryag, mitzvahs, 613 from the ger, trying to liberate ger, which is another way of saying get it right. Trying to get ger right. We know there are some ger toshav that keep only 7. Some can keep more. Some can keep everything. There's millions in the distinctions of the Talmud. What type of ger or non-Jew are you? And what do you keep? How do you keep? It's very complex. That's what we've hopefully accomplished in the book, is undoing the complexity for people to probe and understand. Now, what he would have done was open up the can of worms, and clearly, we're at the end of that 2,000 years of Mashiach. He was at the beginning. And if it's not him, it's just, whatever did happen was at the beginning, and where it went wrong was, I think it wasn't ripe. I think they're trying to eat, a raw apple, an unripe apple, so to speak, and, half pun intended. They were trying to do the job when it needed patience and time and nurturing. And I think they wanted to squeeze it in and save the temple. Right? The temple doesn't have to be destroyed if we do this mentality. But the temple had to come down. And there's no question. So they rushed it, and for whatever it's worth, it just didn't work out. It didn't happen. God brought down the temple, and you had Christianity ready to go. Right? Titus is going to come in, the Roman Empire. You're going to have this Edom is going to be outfitted with a bad version of Jewish ger. The New Testament's going to come on the scene. And then eventually Islam's going to come out of that. But when you look back, you can see the trail of breadcrumbs, not only in Islam and the Quran, in the New Testament, but the very story of Jesus, and the story that we're told is littered with imagery of a ger movement that went bad. And I'll tell you the biggest one. This is the most profound one I've found. There's a law in the book of Bamidbar. We don't go this way today. That the high priest may marry a righteous ger, non-Jewish woman. And you say, how in the world is that possible? And this is learned out from the female captive of war. The one where you let her grow out her nails and her hair.
Right.
And we say that since Pinchas was there, it must have been an option. And we see that the Kohen Gadol of the Chumash, Aaron, Eleazar, and Pinchas, all had non-Jewish wives. So the ger, righteous one, can do the job. Now, why is it a dodgy thing to do? Why is it so dangerous? Because if you lust for her, one iota, you just made wayward children. Right? It's very much like the high priest and the Holy Holies on Yom Kippur. One false move, you're done. So it doesn't pay to do it. And now how it could be that it's a Jewish child, that's a miracle. That God allows this to happen. Kind of like in your car, you can shift from second to third, right, without the clutch, if you just know how to, the exact mile per hour to shift it through, right? There are ways that it was done. The Davidic line had this involved too with Ruth and the women that would come into the Davidic line through Caleb. The Bible's filled with Jew-ger relationships for good and for bad. So you can see the Jesus thing was where it went really bad, right? I mean, obviously it was where people were saying this one's Jewish, this one's not. I mean, total free-for-all, and that is a recipe of disaster. Now, what gets me in the story is, what do you call this non-Jewish, ger righteous woman? They're called Basula, right? Virgin. Now, why are they called that? Because they were known to guard themselves from being taken by a man, which is the captive of war. When they were taken, only the virgins that were never with a man were fit to be brought into Israel. Now, we all know where Jesus supposedly comes from, right? The virgin.
Right.
Now, what that was what I call ger code. That the ger story always is told in a code fashion. So whenever you see, like, for example, Joseph and his wife Esnat, it's like, oh, the virgin, the virgin, the virgin, the virgin. And you say, what's up with this virgin? But if you realize, virgin in Hebrew is Betula, which is also maiden. Right? The ger women were maidens. That's how you know it's a ger issue. And so there's a lot of these things. For example, if you ever see proselyte, could be ger, non-Jew. There's a lot of them. There's a lot of this type of ger code. Whenever you say, oh, this biblical woman, she was beautiful like Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba. Ger code 100,000,000%. So when you learn the Torah of the ger, you'll start to see when the ger is described and expressed in code. Thus, at this point, the whole Jesus story is, to me, just one big ger code. Now, whether he even lived and it happened that there was a maiden involved, i.e. not a virgin, not the story, obviously, but, was there a ger woman involved? I don't know. I don't know if there ever was a Jesus. But what we can look at, the story we've inherited is trying to say, hey, look, this was a ger thing. When you look at the New Testament, it's kind of like, blah, 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 blah to the Jew. But when you investigate, you'll see it was a really bad foreshadowing of a ger movement. And so when you connect the dots and put on your super sleuth hat, you'll see that it has the footprints of ger all over it. And you can identify with, spiritual forensics where it went wrong. You can see the same thing in Islam and all the world religions. You can see where elements of gerim came in. They think there's lost tribesmen in America. I think it's ger that went there. Bringing in things like tefillin and payas, they found like by the Native Americans. Ger went worldwide. So worldwide thought and spirituality is influenced by ger, and you can uncover the ger with the ger code, and that comes from learning proper ger Torah.
Again, this is It Prophecy on Israel National Radio, Root Sheva, and the show is syndicated as Messiah Hour on YouTube. Go to YouTube and type in Messiah Hour with Ari Louis. We're continuing the conversation with Rabbi David Katz, who has his new book, The World of the Ger. You can get that on gergear.com, as well as go to his website, somazal.com. Rabbi Katz, this show is about prophecy, so let's talk about if there's a connection between ger and prophecy.
So this is what makes it awesome. It's like, it sounds really skeptical to be like, oh, I don't know, Rabbi Katz. You're saying that these people back then were ger, and today you're saying that I'm, when I see the Native American with like this thing in his head, and then Eliezer Brody said it's a tefillin and payas, and we think it's lost tribes. You're saying it's lost ger? I don't know about that. And I'm saying, okay, back up. You're saying today, you left the church and you believe XYZ, and you believe you're a lost Jew, lost tribesman, and you somehow want in the northern kingdom. What I'm saying is, hold on. When you look at prophecy, and let's even focus on Ezekiel 37, and you're going to talk about the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom, and the wood of Judah and Benjamin, Joseph, Ephraim, and become one in my hand. When you read the commentaries, and there's other prophecies too. I think it's Isaiah 14:1 about the attachments to Jacob. It all speaks of the ger, right? So when Israel is complete and the exiles come in, all the prophecies are referring to the gerim coming back. So if we know gerim are to come back, and back then we wanted the Messiah, obviously 2,000 years of Messiah. It is only simply logical they were trying to do the ger prophetic return then. Jews were not interested, just as they're not interested now. Because just as much as we don't have the word ger available now from having lost it, or rather it's hidden in exile, back then it was already in exile from Ezra for already almost 500 years. So it was not that the Jews were wrong or didn't want it. We've been in exile. Boker Tov, ladies and gentlemen. The exile never ended. There's never been a redemption. We're still waiting for Messiah. And we were only graced by God now to finally understand prophecy a little bit in terms of ger. And we're seeing it in the flesh, in the studies, in the revelation. And when you work it back, you can see how history was always a ger movement gone wrong.
Get very interested. Again, Israel Prophecy and Israel National Radio. So let's talk about, is the ger the secret of Moshe and the Erev Rav? How does that work exactly?
So that by the Passover offering, right? The nations always say, can we bring a Passover offering? Here's your answer. The answer is yes. The verse says in Exodus, when there's a ger with you. And the Or Chaim commentary says this is God giving his haskama, his approbation to Moses. Moses, you bringing out the Erev Rav with hopes of making them gerim, I endorse you. So we all say, was Moses right or wrong in doing it? God says in the verse, you are eternally right. So the nations, when they become ger and circumcised, even ger toshav, not convert, but even a ger toshav, they can do it. And we find out from that, God says, now listen, this is your national mission, but you need to know my thoughts are not your thoughts. You think this is the right thing to do, and that's why you're doing it. And I agree. But I don't fully agree, says God, because by the definition of my thoughts are different than your thoughts, my reasons for Gerim are different than yours. So beware, you're in for a hoot and a holler. And that's the point. We think we're being righteous and light the nations, and wow, we're so great. God's saying, that's not what Gerim are, that's not why you're doing it, and you're about to find out the hard way. And boy, have we ever. 2,000 years of making Gerim, we are confused and bewildered, and we have, received more than we ever bargained for. But we're almost done, and it's going to be, when it's all said and done, we will look back and have made Gerim and filled the world with the knowledge of God. And it turns out that is our mission as Moses laid it out, to be a light to nations and make Gerim.
So is that I don't know if the main mission is the right word, but how important of a mission is it for the Jews to do that and to be the light of the nations and bring the ger back?
I mean, that's the path to prosperity of being in the land of Israel, Beis HaMikdash, redemption, Mashiach, light to nations. That is what it is. So there's things like, love your fellow Jew. That is a product of light to nations theology. If you don't love the nations, you're not going to love your fellow man. The nations are the universal view that allow us to transcend our ethnic little issue and make it universal. It makes us think big, right? The Jew has to think big because God thinks big on the Jew. So we have to start thinking big. The nations are there to provide us to be a light to them. Everyone culminates together. It's a universal mission. The Torah was given to Ger and Jew. It's always been a Jew-Ger story. Everyone's involved. So light to nations is, I would say, it's like working on yourself and your own mitzvahs and your own reward. That's your issue. But the national job is light to nations. As a nation. Now I wake up, I put on tefillin, and I pray. I act as David the Jew. Right? And my relationship to God is David the Jew. But when I do my part of light to nations, I am David I'm not even Jewish at that level, right? I'm a Kohen, right? So I'm one of the 4 houses of Israel. So again, it's like a totally different mission when I view myself as David the Kohen that yearns for the temple and wants to be light to nations, as opposed to David the Jew who wants to just get close to God. It sounds like a duality, but it isn't. It really is that we have two points of view that we can oscillate back and forth. The Jew and his relationship with God, and the Jew being a light to nations, and it's all one thing. Which the Vilna Gaon says, this is the property, 2 is 1. I am Hashem your God, you should have no other gods. It's the same thing.
All right, last question we have for this episode. Talk about bringing back the prophetic Jew through Ger.
So this is the thing. David the Jew is just David the Jew. I live my life. I try my best. I want to get close to God. I want to have revelation of light. But the Ger says, David the Jew, you're not Jewish. You are a Kohen. And I'm like, I am? It's like we forget that. It's like, yeah, you're practically, so we forget, we're just, Devo and Ari and we're in Israel being us. But the nations are like, be prophetic. You're in the land. Want the temple. So the nations are the ones that allow us to strive higher, to really yearn for that prophetic experience. To be refined and be God's people in the land. Because when we get prophetic, they get prophetic. And they know they're prophetic. That's the whole point. The Ger is in prophecy. But Bob the Christian isn't. And they're saying, hey, Bob the Christian is telling Dave the Jew, you're not in prophecy either. But Dave the Cohen is. So they bring us back to a certain context that we need to be in of Shefa and light, which is the universal temple. Then all the more so we become better at being Dave the Jew, Ari the Jew, and it goes round and round and round. The Ger, really brings the spark that allows us to bring, what the movies always say, go biblical. This is our opportunity to bring biblical back to reality.
All right. Again, this is a prophecy on Israel National Radio, Root Sheva, and the show is syndicated as the Messiah Hour on YouTube. You can find out more about this particular program through JApp. You can get more episodes, I should say, of this program on JApp. Download JApp from iTunes or Google Play stores or from the website www.j-app.me. And again, in regards to YouTube, the Messiah Hour is the name of the channel. Type in Messiah Hour with Ari Louis and subscribe to the channel, because the more subscriptions I get, the higher ranked I'll be up in a YouTube search, and more people will find out about this program, which is obviously one of the goals of this program. So tell your friends and family to please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Any questions, comments, or concerns, you can email me, messiahhour@gmail.com. Show topic you want me to talk about in the future, different guests you want me to interview, let me know, and I'm going to try to make that happen. If you want to make a financial contribution, one chai or two chai, $18, $36. You can do so through my PayPal account, IsraelSportsRadio.yahoo.com. And you can pick up the Rabbi's book, The World of the Ger, from gergear.com, and also check out his website, soulmazal.com. Rabbi, thank you for being on the program today. We really appreciate it as always.
Thanks for having me back. A pleasure as always.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and stay tuned as we go tomorrow for another episode of Is It Prophecy. But for today, thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a great day. Be well out there.